And welcome to the program. I'm your host, George Rideout, and always working the soundboard is Lynn. And today is part 2 of our talk and sharing with Michael Tsarion, who's an expert on the occult histories of Ireland and America. He is the author of the acclaimed book Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, and is the producer and presenter of the Origins and Oracle series, which explores ancient mysteries and forbidden knowledge. His many appearances on metaphysical radio and TV programs, along with his lectures and workshops, have given rise to the name Teacher's Teacher. If you want, definitely check out Michael's website. It is one of the most amazing websites I've come across. It's www.michaeltsarion.com. He is metaphysician extraordinaire. He is Michael Tsarion, and we're pleased to have him here with us again this morning. Are you there, Michael?
Hello, George. Nice to be back.
Great to have you back. We got into a great beginning last week with psychic vampirism, and it's a great opener to what we'll be talking about today. I thought we'd start off with the origins of evil. Explain, what is a conspiracy theory?
Well, there is really no such thing as a conspiracy theory. That's mostly a derogatory term that's been used to basically marginalize and, I believe, ridicule people with an open mind. And society has many ways of sort of ridiculing people who are free thinkers and people who are able to connect seemingly, disparate realities or disparate things, and yet it's incredible, isn't it, that the human brain, they say that the heaviest human brains are those who have most synapses. For instance, women's brains are heavier than men's because they have more synapses, and synapses get created when exactly that happens. When your biology, when your thinking patterns are able to connect unlikely things in a non-linear way, it turns out that your brain is actually heavier, meaning you're smarter, But should you actually act upon that or speak, openly about connecting disparate things, then you're called a conspiracy nut. It basically is for people who read behind the lines, who see the interlocking, interconnecting, people who have developed what's called pattern recognition. Now, you see, we're very hypocritical because in society we will promote and honor people who can do that when there's a material sort of component. Say that you're an art critic or a movie critic or even a really, really good editor. These are people who do exactly that. They're able to read behind the lines of what a movie maker is saying. A great literature critic can tell you all sorts of things about the life of a famous author, like Thomas Hardy or Jane Austen, by reading between the lines and bringing out all of this color and tone. And people are just aghast when these people talk. They're like considered, the great intellects of our time, the people who can do this. But the moment that you do exactly the same thing in a social sphere or in a political sphere, you're a conspiracy nut. So it's a complete hypocrisy because there's nothing that a good conspiracy author does that is not already being done by any other kind of critic in any other field. It's just that for some reason, probably because of the implications, a person who makes these connections, it's very threatening to the ordinary person. And of course, conspiracy, people don't run around, seeking money and seeking fame and things like that. So, they're pretty much a threat.
Being an objective observer, really.
Isn't it? And, I always do say, I can understand one reason why people who are in alternative history or alternative, the research community get a little bit, lambasted is because, unfortunately, unlike a lot of critics and unlike a lot of, skilled speculators, in the conspiracy movement, you get too many people who really don't know what they're doing. The UFO movement is full of people like that, and the New Age movement is full of like that. And these are people who do too much label reading, and they don't really pursue in an erudite or, efficient way this kind of subject. So, in fact, they do injustice to the subject. And I've been saying this for a long, long time, that if you're going to work to expose government corruption, or you're going to maybe be looking into, something like the 9/11 mystery or any other area that is really alternative and that already is very taboo, then the worst thing that you can do is do a bad job of it and then come on the media. Yeah. So that the first moment you open your mouth, somebody like Bill O'Reilly or anybody of that background can completely destroy you.
Yeah.
You're not only going to look bad yourself, what's going to happen to you is that you're also going to bring bad reputation to this sacred knowledge. And this is what has been going on for, too long, that people who are either, they're not able to carry, see, it's not just the knowledge, you have to be able to carry it. You have to be able to deliver it in an erudite way. You have to present yourself correctly. You have to know your facts, and you have to know your enemy.
Yeah, that's
and
for
unfortunately,
sure.
this is not the case, which is why so many times when somebody comes on radio or goes on the public sphere or tries to come before the media, they're immediately shot down by these hosts, even on PBS, but certainly on the mainstream, because they have not done their homework to already prepare to know the mindset of these people, so to be able to come back at them very, very hard, and therefore do justice to these radical subjects.
So are the people that you see on TV, are they the architects of the whole game that's being played?
No, very, very rarely. In fact, these are the people at the, that you actually see in the public eye have themselves only a very faint understanding. They might be called, almost what you would call on probation. These are people who may later on get rank, but it'll take them 30 years, and they really have to prove it. For somebody to get a knighthood, for somebody to be, brought up the ladder, they've got to really prove that they serve the system, that they bought into the ideology. But even the people, it depends what perspective you're on. If you're on the bottom tier of the pyramid, the power pyramid, then the Henry Luce, and whoever, Catherine Graham and Dan Rather and people of that ilk, the people that you see in the media, they may look mighty high to you because, we're down here on the bottom of the pyramid. So they seem to have a station a little bit above us. These television pundits, certain, people like John Cameron, the makers of films and so on. Yeah, they can look pretty illustrious, the Spielbergs and everything. But, if you're further up the pyramid, they're nothing.
Yeah.
They're nothing. It's a matter of perspective. Of course, everybody like that, usually these massively egotistical people, they're always legends in their own mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So the moment that they get a little bit of actual, kudos, or the moment that they're actually initiated into a certain kind of mystery, or that they're instructed, or given more budget or whatever, then, of course, their ego goes out the window,
So who is at the top of the pyramid?
Well, the top of the pyramid, a pyramid does have a top. And a pyramid also has four sides. And therefore, there are the individuals at the top. If you look at the symbols that they use themselves, the Masonic symbols, you will see that the pyramid, the pyramidon at the top is actually removed from the main pyramid. Now, this is their own symbolism.
Kind of like
it's
on
not
the
just
dollar.
a continuous pyramid. They talk about the missing capstone. They talk about, and if you look on the dollar bill to get an image of what they're showing you themselves, you'll also notice that the top 14th layer is two-dimensional, whereas the pyramid, of course, is three-dimensional. So they're almost even saying that the people at the top are not even on the same dimension as, the people that they control below, or the system that they control below.
That's a really interesting point.
It is. It's really remarkable. But more important than that is people have really done their homework, they will be able to see at a glance that the symbolism is Egyptian. So we're already being told something here in the symbolism to look to Egypt. And when we look to Egypt, if people have followed my work specifically, they will know that the eye at the top of the pyramid is not just the eye of Horus or the eye of Ra, like so many people who haven't done their homework are throwing around that information, because the light, the beams of light that are coming out of the eye, and the Egyptian name for the word eye, and also the Hindu word for the word eye, is Akka. A, the letter A in Egyptian had the symbol of an eagle, right? So if you wrote the letter A, of course we know that the Egyptians never used, or not, they did use writing, but normally we are familiar with Egyptian hieroglyphics, right? So they used the hierogram. The hieroglyphic for the letter A, our letter A, was an eagle. Well, you see an eagle on the other side of the pyramid. In fact, an eagle is looking at the pyramid. Then the pyramid itself is Egyptian. And the capstone looks like a letter A. So the letter A and the eagle are connected. They're exactly the same symbol. They mean the same thing, Akka. But the eagle was the symbol of Aton, or Akhenaton. This is the symbol of the pharaohs, you see, and the royal dynasties. That's why the Romans used the standard of the eagle. The Greeks have used it, the Nazis have used it, and now the American government are using it. And the American government are known to use Egyptian symbolism left, right, and center. That eagle on the dollar bill is not a Judaic eagle, but an Egyptian eagle coming from the time of the cult of Aton. And the cult of Aton is what people need to really study, especially in an American context, George, because we have now, since the time of G. Edward Griffin and Eustace Mullins, started to get a handle on the fact that there are secret societies operating in the world. You can say that in England, in the early part of the 19th century, books have been written on this. But if you're just dealing with an American context, then it is extremely modern. It's an extremely modern phenomena for the American people and American authors and American investigative journalists to start working on the theme of secret societies operating. A couple of people, like Louis McFadden and Charles Lindbergh Sr., that's Charles Lindbergh's father, and Francis Cochrane, and one or two others had mentioned it sort of in passing. But books, when it started to be written about in literature, is a very, very recent phenomenon. It dates basically to Eustace Mullins and G. Edward Griffin and people like that. So what I'm trying to say is that because it's new, there's also a lot of pitfalls in that. Because it's new, people are still in the sort of research, the early stages of the research. And therefore, people are pointing here, they're pointing there for the origins. So your question of coming straight to the point is almost a historical thing. It's not something that is an old case in America to ask who is it that is at the top of the pyramid. It's one of the most important questions we begin asking because the answers are still really not known yet. People go so far as being able to point, the Jesuits, wait, no, it's the Masons, wait, it's these guys called the Knights Templar, and et cetera, et cetera. Or, it might be the church or whatever. And, that's great. But you see, a person can get caught into those whirlpools and remain there forever.
Yeah. And there's so much...
they got to look at the symbolism and they got to trace it back and find out that this thing goes way back. It's much older than America. It's much older than Europe. It goes right back into the old Druidic symbols of Ireland, for instance, and it goes back into the old Egyptian cults of the sun. And believe it or not, even though, 4,000 years have gone by, that's not a lot of time in history.
Yeah, that's true.
And there are still dynastic families ruling today, ruling from Europe. They own America through the Hudson Bay Company and the Virginia Company and the Russell Trust. The people in America know better as the Skull and Bone Society and these other organizations. These organizations are funded and controlled by people who are in direct bloodline descendancy from Rome, from the dynasties of Rome, Babylon, and Egypt. They are the ones who are at the top of the pyramid. And they themselves have bloodline that goes even further back to Atlantis.
Do they have any alliances to the Freemasons or no?
Yeah, the Freemasons are part of this infrastructure. They're like a steering committee. They operate, at the behest. They serve two main functions. One is that the Freemason enclaves are these cults. They do provide a very, very good working cover for those who are trying to influence society. That's one of the first things they do. And on the other side, they're great archivists of ancient knowledge so that it doesn't get lost. Because what we have to understand is that when we hear about book burnings and libraries, the great libraries of the world, being burned and pillaged and sacked, and when we hear about whole cities being sacked of their knowledge and of their treasures, we have this opinion that all those treasures and books are just lost. What we don't realize is that none of that stuff is lost. You read about it in history that the monasteries got burned down or a great library burned down. What you don't hear about is that, it got burned down after the knowledge was taken out. So when you're hearing about the rape of the Druids, and the fall of the great Phoenician empires, and, all of this stuff, you've got to realize that knowledge is sequestered. It's taken. Not only the physical knowledge in the form of books and scrolls and texts, but also the intellectual knowledge has been preserved in the Masonic groups, which is one of the reasons why it's intriguing to study Masonry and even become a Mason. I don't recommend that, but that's one of the reasons why people do that, is because they get a feeling for a history.
Yeah.
And they're into being like antiquarians. And they understand that great mystery traditions that would have been lost forever, just in the same way as that during the Dark Ages, the great knowledge of Greece and Rome, the philosophy of Greece was lost, but the Arabs preserved it. This is well known, so that after the Dark Ages, when the great universities were opened in Europe, they were Arab universities. They were Muslim. And through those universities, primarily in Spain, but in other places in the world, the great philosophies of Plato, you see, and Democritus, and Aristotle, you see, and the Neoplatonic scholars, was brought back into the West by the Arabs. Well, it's a sort of a same parallel, that the knowledge that has been kept from ordinary human beings, and this is one of the reasons why I'm anti-Masonic and anti, these kind of organizations, because even though I recognize that they have been archivists and that they preserved great knowledge in a very pristine way, they've also made sure that the rest of the human race does not get privy to that.
Or else give out lots of disinformation.
Yes, they also are breeders of disinformation.
Yeah.
But you see, first of all, there's not just one thing as one Masonic lodge. There's many different kinds of Masonry in the world. A lot of them appear to be at loggerheads with each other. And Masonry serves many different functions. You see, it's a hydra. It's a many-headed thing. It's not just one simple, structure, because, of course, if they did that, then it would have been exposed years ago. So they keep many different kinds of grades. They keep many different kinds of personality out there, so that it becomes very slippery, and it's hard to grasp. There's some Christian Masonry groups, you see. There's Islamic ones. There's ones that allow females to be joining. There's ones that, deal in occultism. There's others that are more charitable. So, when somebody's going, the Masons, other people can come along and go, oh, well, what are you talking about? You can't be serious. These Masonic orders don't have any, negative agenda, because look at all the good that they do over here, or, they've been active in politics over there, or they're great charitable people over here, and, oh, look, if we didn't have them, then we couldn't have had a French underground, for instance, that fought the Nazis, you see. So there's all sorts of slants, which is, again, why people have to do their homework and really be specific about who and what they're accusing.
When we hear about the Fabian Way, who are the Fabians?
Well, basically the Fabians are socialists. Remember, I think we were talking before about what happens when these individuals combine occultism and politics together. Then you have a lethal cocktail. Well, the Fabians on paper are merely socialistic people, left-wing, very much like your Democratic Party in America, only very wealthy ones, which is sort of a contradiction in terms. How can you be, Democratic and yet multi-millionaires? Well, this is how it works in the socialist movement. And these are people who are definitely Freemasonic backed. They're either members of the Freemasons themselves, or they're organizations who are started by Freemasons, or that they are very closely aligned with Freemasons. But on paper, the Fabians are a left-wing organization that started in Oxford University by a man called Sidney Webb. But the Webbs were not just political people, and neither were many of the other Fabians that they hung around with. These were people who were very much involved in theosophy, anthroposophy, and in Freemasonry and in Eastern mysticism. So they had an occult aspect as well. And their gurus were people like Alice Bailey and Annie Besant, who took over, the Theosophical Society after Madame Blavatsky died. And Madame Blavatsky is often erroneously, blamed for the changes within the Theosophical Society. It was complete nonsense, because she had already died. And when she was alive, she was constantly warning people about mixing politics and occultism together. Now, the Fabian Society, from an American context, is very, very important for people to realize that, because the Council on Foreign Relations, you see, and the Trilateral Commission, a lot of these organizations were funded and created by British Fabians. And one of the most important British Fabians was, of course, Cecil Rhodes of the Rhodes Round Table, the Rhodes Scholarship. And it's these individuals who then came over with their henchmen. They attracted and initiated many so-called American men, and formed these organizations that basically control the American government now. So what had happened was, I think that they realized at some point, either they didn't want to, or either because they tried it and failed, they knew that they could never take America by force of arms. Remember the old War of Independence?
Yep.
Well, the War of Independence was also very much an occult war. It wasn't something that most people realized. First of all, it was not won. Americans didn't win it. There's an old statement that Americans are famous for losing the wars they win. And it's a very brilliant statement, that, because, in fact, the American didn't win. But for some reason, it was discovered that the British, if they moved in an oligarchical way, like opening their banks and having a king, all that stuff they tried in the beginning, where, just it would be like England, that there'd be a royal family and all of these things, that wasn't going to work, because you had far too many rebellious, disgruntled people here, and that just wouldn't have worked economically. So it was decided that the war had to come in through the back door, that if you war with these people openly, it's just not going to work. But that doesn't mean that the British system, which has colonies throughout the entire world, right, which has subjugated India, which has subjugated Africa, which subjugated China in the 1890s, it's just going to go, okay, well, we'll just forget about America then. This uncharted place, full of ore and full of forests and full of fishery, you think they're just going to say no way to that and leave because, Canada is just as big as America.
Yeah.
You think they're going to say no to all of this? The Queen of England still owns all of Canada to this day. There's barely a patch in Canada she doesn't own. So they already own Canada. They basically have, through their colleagues at the Vatican, they own South America. So they're not going to let America go, but they realize that if they do it in an open way, it could happen that they might be completely overthrown because America, is already calling on the Tsar of Russia and many other, places that are hostile to this system, the British system. And it could happen that the Americans, if pushed too far, that they do amass an army, and they do, in fact, have, they do get allies from Russia and from other places. There could be trouble. There could be a vast world war, and that might cost the British too much. So it was at that time, after the War of Independence, that they decided to move in with the Fabian organization. And the Fabian motto is the war of attrition. Very, very slow, gradual progress or move towards the same goal. War is what, in a couple of years, you want to attain your goal. But there's also a lot of loss that comes with that. There's also a lot of, logistics that's required there. And it also brings you a really bad name as well. So, there's also a possibility that you might lose. So all in all, it was decided to work on the American front in a little bit different way. And that is what has happened. And it's taken about 180 years or 200 years for that war of attrition to progress. And certainly by the time of Roosevelt, it is very much heated up, because Roosevelt was a major Fabian, so was Truman, and so was Woodrow Wilson, you see. So they start getting their own men in a much more public and open way. So before Roosevelt, it would have been more concealed that the Fabians were operating in society, and many American scholars would not have known about it. But certainly by the time of Roosevelt, he did so many bizarre things that were very communistic, very socialistic, like his New Deal. His New Deal was meaningless. All the stuff that you needed to, work to heal the Depression. Well, wait a minute. The Depression was artificially created in the first place. There's nothing to heal. The thing was the New Deal, was brought in over a operation. The same government who bring in the New Deal to save the workers and feed Americans had already impoverished them beforehand. The same group. You see, this is the whole what you call the dialectic at work. See, it became a little bit obvious then what was going on, because the New Deal is patently a communistic manifesto type of creation. It's very anti-American, in fact. And this then started to alert scholars and thinkers, and then from that moment on, people start to really realize, wait a minute here, we got something going on. If people had their eyes open before that Roosevelt era, they would have noticed that something was already going wrong in America by the opening of what's called the Federal Reserve, which is the first, private bank of America.
Right. Well, image is everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to take our first break, and when we come back, I want to ask you who started the Illuminati.
Okay.
Here is Peter Gabriel and Games Without Frontiers. Enjoy. And welcome back to the program. You're listening to Sacred Space here on CJUM 101.5 FM out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. We're sitting here talking with Michael Tsarion. So, Michael, before the break, I wanted to ask, who started the Illuminati?
Well, officially it started in 1776 with a guy called Adam Weishaupt in Germany, in Bavaria. But, my researches and the researches of other people show that the Illuminati is a much older organization. It's the same thing as with the Knights Templars. People think that the Knights Templars date, from the era of the First Crusade. It's just that during the Crusade, they came out into the open more, because that was an era in which, there was a lot of need for open organizations, like the militia. So their identity was a little bit harder to hide at that time. It's just that, sort of complicit historians then try to tell you that this was the birth of these organizations. It's absolutely ludicrous. Some of these organizations are very, very ancient. But Adam Weishaupt in 1776, along with a guy called Baron Sneege, they, officially started this organization, and they had an official agenda, and they were actually called the Perfectables before they were called the Illuminati. They called themselves the Perfectables, and they had 5 members in the beginning. But turns out that they were going strong, and one of their they were sending secret messages to their colleagues in France, by way of a horseback rider, a messenger. And as fate would have it, that messenger on horseback, a great storm came, and the messenger was actually struck by lightning before he left the borders of Bavaria, I believe. And so when he was brought in and his satchel was opened, all of these secret society documents were discovered, you see, by the authorities. And so the existence of Weishaupt's Illuminati was basically discovered, and it was brought to the attention of the King of Bavaria, and he had their houses raided. And so it was out of the bag, and from that moment on, people thought that the Illuminati had been suppressed. But actually, Adam Weishaupt had got away. He actually escaped, and the order continued. But the most important aspect to remember is that this was not just a brainchild of some socialistic, humanitarian Adam Weishaupt, whose own brainchild was to found a secret society. He himself had been initiated by a man called Kolmer, Kolmer, 5 years before, in about 1771. Adam Weishaupt was initiated into an Egyptian secret society by this merchant, very wealthy merchant from Egypt. So it's actually it's people behind Adam Weishaupt. Now, Weishaupt himself was a Jesuit, so there's even a more controversial, slant to the story. The Vatican, not the Vatican as Roman Catholics would understand it, but the Vatican within the Vatican, that means the secret controlling oligarchical families, in an Italian context. These are people who would have also operated behind the Medicis and the Borgias and the Paduas and all of these, the Sforzas and all the families of Padua and Genoa, the rich black nobility families, the Ghibellines. There's all sorts of different oligarchical families that the world needs to find out about. It may have been these individuals, very much aligned to the Vatican, who actually funded the Illuminati. A lot of people find this hard to believe because on paper the Illuminati, you see, is an order that's meant to be anti-religious or anti-monarchical. They're meant to be against Catholic religion, Christianity, and against monarchy. But of course, this is one of their famous, ruses to throw people off the scent.
Wow. So where did the Nephilim come in?
Where do they come in? Well, see, the Nephilim is just a biblical term for what I believe is the visitations, in many, many millennia ago to this planet. This all ties into the whole idea of how come it is that man is so technically advanced? How come, he's so emotionally arrested? How could he have had so many incredible inventions, about 7,000 to 11,000 years ago, and they don't seem to have any antecedent stages? Basically all the anomalies, can be you have to account for them in some way. And science and religion have had thousands of years to account for these anomalies, and they've done a terrible job. I mean, they're legends in their own mind, and they think they've done a marvelous job. But as we, the human race, become more literate and more sane and more rational, and now that we're able to read, and study for ourselves in the last, couple of hundred years, it hasn't been a very long time that we've been able to do that. But now, since there has been an explosion of interest, an explosion of, writing and libraries, the human race is smarter than it was before. So we want answers, and we've not been given those answers by the officialdom. But we have been given the answers in mythology. In the mythologies and legends of the world, there are plenty of answers as to what was going on in ancient times, and that there was these great civilizations. And the myths and legends also talk about how they were destroyed. And they also talk about the visitation of fantastically advanced beings who mixed their DNA with our DNA, that they crossed over, they involved themselves in these experiments which tampered with the DNA, the biology, and that also means the consciousness of the pre-visitation individuals here. And these are not Neanderthals or anybody that's been put before us now, because of course that's a big lie that's been invented afterwards to account for the pre-visitation era. So these are basically off-world beings that visited this planet and have been steering the destiny of the planet. None of those people are alive themselves originally. Their original fallen angels don't, they're not alive, let's say, but they're descendants. Every one of the human race that they have interfered with, every single person carries the alien DNA. And in fact, just the last month or so, it's been now basically confirmed from scientific point of view that this DNA exists.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Are they from the planet that was called the second sun?
No, they're not from there. The second sun was a euphemism used for a very large body in our own solar system that got destroyed after these, people start basically interfered with us. Their entrance into our solar system also involved a war, a skirmish in the skies that was seen from Earth, and it very much traumatized the people that were on the Earth. And it's from those days of watching these flashes in the sky and the thunderings in the sky that the whole mythologies come of the warring gods, especially in Scandinavian mythology, but all over the Native American Indian mythologies. They talk about the flashes and thunderings, in the sky, and that the gods are angry. Well, this is actually because they witnessed a tremendous tumult in the sky, which resulted in the destruction of a very large planet that used to be part of our solar system. And there's been all sorts of disinformation that's been, put out there to try and cover up the existence of this body. But of course, scientists sort of shot themselves in the foot because it was a scientist called Bode, famous Bode's law. Their own science proved that there was a missing planet out there, that there should be another planet between Mars and Jupiter. Then we have the phenomenon of the asteroid belt, which is the remains of a planet. Charles Fort, the American researcher, discovered that all of these strange rains of frogs and fishes and salt water and ice and oil and all sorts of debris that periodically falls to the Earth, especially at the times of great storms. Where's all that coming from? So again, there's never any serious answering to all of this. But it turns out that this is part of the remains of an enormous planet that was destroyed in ancient times about 50,000 years ago. And, our planet is still reeling from the shock of that destruction.
Now, could that have also caused one of the ice ages? Because couldn't that even...
Was that connected to the ice ages? Well, first of all, there was no ice age. The ice age is a phenomenon that was part of what they call the Pleistocene epoch, which was a 2 million year geological epoch. And just in the last 10 years, there's been now counter evidence to show that there was no such thing as the Pleistocene epoch. Well, my goodness, if that isn't, the whole world should be talking about that.
Yeah, that's...
And the men who discovered this are the top geologists and anthropologists in Oxford and Cambridge universities.
Why don't we hear any of this stuff?
Because, my God, this would shake the foundations, every lie that we've been told. The one thing that science cannot ever stand, is if one of their own, sacred cows, a big one, is leveled. Now, of course, they have been leveled. They don't mind a couple of mavericks, writing a book or, sort of saying something against them. Because those people, they can all easily ostracize. The Velikovskys, the Beaumonts, you see, even the Michael Tsarions. They're not worried about people like us because, we can be silenced or, nobody's going to listen to us. The one thing that they cannot stand is the top brass from within their own totem pole, from MIT, from CIT, from Oxford, from Cambridge, from, the top university, coming out and refuting their sacred cows. And this is exactly what has been done. So they must then keep that quiet.
Yeah.
But as a matter of fact, these individuals showed that there was ice action in the world. There's definitely been ice drift, which has caused some of the geological formations. But that icing, that permafrost, was created by superheating first. And these new geologists, these people have been able to show exactly how that works, that through volcanism, volcanoes, earthquakes, you see, the superheating of the atmosphere, and a lot of them can't even account for how that happened. But they say that if the atmosphere of the Earth was superheated, then, of course, the radical cooling from that immediate blasting of heat will create ice action on the Earth. So you will definitely register ice action and catastrophe from ice. But it is not an ice age per se, and this is what I go into very deeply on the DVD that I made on the Atlantis, the DVD that goes with the Atlantis book, because I talk about this extensively, about the new kind of science that has come to prove that this ice age phenomena is just completely nonsensical.
Wow.
And the planet Tiamat's destruction very much could have had something to do with this, because the change of the gravitational pull would have affected the tectonic plates, causing enormous friction and volcanism. It would have helped to heat up the atmosphere of the Earth, and also the Roche limit, which is a sort of a barrier around our Earth, would have also been superheated. And this could have easily precipitated boiling magma and all sorts of phenomena, and the result of that, a symptom of that, is ice action.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was thinking. That how could it not affect the Earth in some way? A whole planet, relatively close.
Yeah.
Blowing up. How could it not affect?
People say the moon could be part of Tiamat, a breakaway part of Tiamat. People say the moon was not as close to us, even in the history of the Maya. They've worked out that the Maya referred to the moon as being much further away and much smaller. The evidence is there for all this strange debris that's hanging around our ionosphere, and also in the asteroid belt. But again, we don't even need to turn to science. I'm a person who doesn't even bother looking into what they say. You just go back to the mythologies, and they're telling you how it might be in a bit of a poetic language and so on, but they're telling you clearly about what happened. The ferocity. We have lengthy tracts from different sacred texts. This is what I go into the Atlantis book, showing that the ancients knew full well that there was a war of the gods, and that this caused enormous tribulation morally. It changed people's diet. It shortened the lifespan because it changed the growing cycles of the earth, and that the earth changed from what was known as ver perpetuum, the perpetual spring, into a changing climate, radically changed. The topography was changed. And this affected the diet instantaneously, so that in a few hundred years, they say people's biologies radically changed. The behavior of animals have changed. It's just, but again, it's about looking at all the information from biology and anthropology and paleontology and mythology and history, and then it takes a mind to be able to connect it all together. We may be newly literate, but still some of us, and most of us in the world, have not developed the pattern recognition. We can barely read and write, and we haven't developed the capacity for synthetic thought, using the right brain, using the imagination to connect all of the different phenomena. People are still very fearful of knowledge. People still have a very tunnel vision on a thing. People still rely on a teacher to tell them what to believe. No. The teacher's job is just to bring you the information. I don't know where we got this idea that the teacher's there to tell you what to believe.
Yeah.
This is exactly what we have now. No, a teacher's job is anyone that brings you some information for your perusal.
Now,
Period.
I was thinking about this, and maybe you can clarify. Could this new planet X that they've suddenly discovered, could that be the missing planet of the Sumerians?
No, I think that's mostly disinformation.
Okay.
One of the greatest areas of disinformation, and I could be wrong, but I believe that this planet Nibiru and all of this planet X is another ruse, so that when people get into studying what I'm talking about, they often get sidetracked into the studying of the planet X phenomena, which is, I believe, a carefully concocted, but again, apparently sound scientific thing, which will bamboozle people who are into astronomy and science and get them very interested, and so people go charging after that. But there's no real corroboration in any other mythology. This is one of the things you have to realize, is that some of these theories that come out of say one area are not corroborated in all the other mythologies. I try to deal with the mythologies that are very much dispersion. There's an element of dispersion there that you'll find a very similar refrain in, say, 5, 10, 15, 20 other mythologies of the world. Now, the Nibiru thing sounds almighty interesting, and it's meant to come out of Sumerian Babylonian mythology, but the problem is it's not confirmed in any other kind of mythology in the world, so that made me suspicious. Whereas the destruction of Tiamat and the tumult and the idea of a careering comet, perhaps, that turns out to be in hundreds of legends, corroborated all over the world.
Yeah, and what a way to get you, not thinking about that, to get you into a different direction. Right.
Well, I mean, as I say, a lot of the science world, a lot of these institutions are controlled by very, very smart people who want to delay. I think they know that eventually the human race is going to crack it, but they'd like to delay that, denouement as long as possible. So the way to do that is to keep throwing sand in your eyes, and to also, get you to follow all that glitters is not gold, as they say, but, to get you to follow all of these false leads. It's one of the ways to slow down the progress of discovery. The researcher in this field has to be highly discriminating.
And be able to think with both parts of the brain.
Yes, absolutely right.
Yeah. So what was the great sin?
The great sin that is being spoken of in the Bible is something that happened, many thousands of years before the Bible was written. But still in the Bible we can get we are actually being told. Amazingly, inaccurate. And of course, if you add to reading the Bible about the sin, if you go into the uncanonical works, the apocryphal works, the Book of Enoch, then you start to get a picture that, wait a minute, it's not just this thing of the fall. It has nothing to do with Eve. It's not to do with the angels accompanying women, in a sort of a sexual way, that they believe that the Jewish rabbis and scholars will say that, look, man may have fallen from heaven, but man may have also been seduced by the evil one. Then the uncanonical books are telling us, yes, he was seduced by the evil one, and he was also biologically tampered with by the evil ones, meaning that there was some sort of sexual, mating or coupling with the earth women. And that's about as far as the majority of the world scholars have got. To say that the angels, accompanied with women is still radical enough from a Christian point of view. These documents were once considered part of the Christian, scriptures. They were akin to them. And therefore, a lot of Christians and Jews do accept that there was a presence here of the sons of men, the sons of God, the angels, the fallen angels. But that's about as far as most people have got. I go a lot further than that and say it actually was not just the physical accompanying of men and women, or gods and women, because many of the other books that were never part of the Bible, many of these other, like I said, if you cross-reference it with Babylonian and Sumerian, you see, and Egyptian texts, you start to find out that there was something more than that. You start to find out, in fact, that this sexual coupling didn't work, and that they had to go one step further than that. And there's even statements to the fact that the sexual coupling did not work, and that the children that were born from these, liaisons were hideous in the extreme, and that even the mothers died at childbirth and so on. So I believe that the real sin constitutes the next step, George, which was that these highly intelligent off-world beings started then to go one step further to actually work on a much higher level than just normal intercourse, and they went further to actually tamper with the DNA of the human beings. They had this ability, they had this skill.
The first genetic experiments.
Yeah, like some sort of hideous Planet of the Apes experiment that people, again, would find very far-fetched because, of course, this is something that's meant to be only discovered today, and people who have no historical understanding whatsoever and who don't know how to read between the lines of the mythologies of the world, they believe this is something that's just been, discovered 5 minutes ago. Well, people are going to have to wake up and discover this is many thousands of years old.
So now, the Elohim from Lemuria?
The Elohim is I take the word. The word is pretty much nobody has a real consensus on the word at all. So I kind of take a liberty and say that I believe that it could be that if we wanted, just for argument's sake, to say that the Yahwistic, Jehovahist, concept is more of an Atlantean, image of God, and that the Elohim, which means the many gods, or the ones chosen from the many gods, or a lot of people have also said that the Elohim could mean the feminine aspect of God. And I like that. I like that a lot, that concept. Mm-hmm. So I then tie that in with the Lemurian race, who were a group of people that were much more aligned spiritually. And even though they were also the equal of the science, they had the intelligence of the Nephilim, and they were descended from the Nephilim. They also honored the human DNA part of us. But that's just my take on it. I would not argue with a biblical scholar or anything like that this is the case. It's just, then you'd be splitting hairs about the meaning of the word, and there's a different, there's an Aramaic translation of Elohim, there's a, Greek translation, there's the Hebrew translation, It's just, I deal more connotatively there, because the Yahwistic connotation of God is a very masculine one. It's a very anti-feminine one. Mm-hmm. For instance, in the synagogues, you see women were never allowed. And there's even an old Talmudic statement that says that, 10 men make a synagogue. You have to have 10 men in order to conjure the presence of God in the synagogue. And there's an old Talmudic statement that if you have 9 men and 1 million women, you still couldn't convene in the synagogue because women are nothing after all.
Wow.
Okay, so this is this Yahwistic tendency, which I trace back to the time of the Atlanteans. That's something that came into our existence from the tampering with the DNA. And then I take the liberty of saying, well then, wait, if this Elohim, if it does in fact represent the more feminine aspect of God, if it incorporates the Sophia aspect, if it incorporates the idea that there are many gods or many aspects of one God, then this would definitely be, something that I believe would tie in with what the Lemurians, for the short time that they were around, were trying to also teach.
Right. Okay, we're going to take another break here. When we come back, I want to ask you about the Anukai.
Okay.
Here is Spirit of the West and Time to Ring Some Changes. Enjoy. And welcome back to the program. You're listening to Sacred Space here on CJUM 101.5 FM out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. We're sitting here talking with Michael Tsarion, alternative historian, researcher, expert on the occult histories. And before we went to break, I wanted to ask you about the Anunnaki. So who are the Anunnaki?
Well, the same thing as the Nephilim, basically. Again, it's a matter of translation. But the word Anunnaki probably is originally something Egyptian, by way, then it moved into Babylon or Sumeria. It comes from the word Anunnaki, which means the heavenly serpents. Now, the word Nephilim also connotes serpent, by the way. It just it comes from several roots, but the Nephilim, if it's Kneph with a K, K-N-E-P-H, that is a word that relates to the serpent. And this is what basically opens the whole ball of wax of my work, is because of the permutations of the serpent, the fact that Moses, held the serpent. The Israelites have always used the symbol of the serpent. We have the serpent being used today. It's been used by Christian sects in the past. It's certainly been used even in Ireland, where there's no snakes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
We're talking about the serpent over there. We see the dragon dances of China. See the serpents in the Maya iconography. The Vikings have their serpent-shaped boats. What is going on here with this serpent bit? And then you find that it's talked about a lot in the Bible. The words cherubim and seraphim even mean fiery serpents. So we got some major questions about the serpents. And of course, if you look into Egyptian mythology, you see this a lot. Now, I believe that the word Ankh, A-N-K-H, and I go into this in the Atlantis DVD, I believe that the word Ankh is a compressed or a sort of a derivation of the word Anunnaki. So that when you see the gods of Egypt holding that Ankh, that is a pictogram, a illustration, sort of like the way a general would wear, his stripes or something, that actually represents the Anunnaki. Because the word Anki or Ankh, I believe, is a poor translation or a poor rendition of the word for the heavenly serpent. And it's very interesting to me that we find this heavenly serpent, on many corporate logos today. We certainly find it on the medical corporations, of the world, these monopolies. So this is what, again, ties my work in very much to that this is not just something of ancient history. We got something going on here in the world before our eyes that has some very ancient roots.
When you talk about the Atlanteans, who were they?
Well, these are, the people who actually constructed Atlantis or lived in Atlantis were these heavenly serpents, the ones who, it wasn't earthbound creatures that, used that. Atlantis, for a start, was not a continent. This is another big mistake that people have got from Plato's work. The continent that Atlantis was on was a continent called Appalachia, which was not far from where England is now in the Atlantic Ocean, just south of Greenland, Iceland, you see, in that area. And in fact, it used to be the continent of Appalachia, which sank beneath the waves. And these geologists have discovered it. It's right there. It's well known. I believe that the citadel or the city-state or the place of Atlantis was on this continent, and it went down. It sank as well. That it was not, and also that there wasn't just one of these continents. There was several. There were several great continents of old that are talked about in the mythologies and are well known. And some of them were colonies of the Atlantean colony, and some were separate.
So maybe possibly some of the Lemurians. And what is the difference between Atlantis and Lemuria?
Well, you're right. This what Graham Hancock and others have been discovering off the coast of Ceylon. These underwater ruins that are being found all over, more in the Pacific area. These, to me, are parts of the ancient continent of Lemuria, which may have actually included most of Antarctica, certainly Australia, New Zealand, Thursday Island, that kind of area. And that they may have had, the Lemurians may have had outposts in what is today modern Bolivia, because enormous, inexplicable ruins have been discovered there. So I believe that if you're talking about what is now the Pacific Basin, and perhaps even Hawaii and all these places, they may have been part of the Lemurian complex, stretching all the way down to Australia. And if we're dealing with the northern climes, Hyperborea, Ultima Thule, different things in mythology, the original Garden of Eden and Avalon, these are all aspects of Atlantis. These would have been outposts of Atlantis. And the difference is that Lemuria came later. Lemuria was settled a little bit after the time of the Atlanteans. In fact, the Lemurians were a breakaway sect of people who were not happy with what the Atlanteans, and the Atlanteans would have been their forefathers. They were not happy with what these guys were doing, so they had a sort of a civil war.
That's what I thought, that there was a war between the two of them.
Yeah, this is the original War of the Gods. When they talk about the War of the Gods, they actually are talking about the civil war between the creation of the Atlanteans, their first offspring, rebelling against their fathers. And this, I believe, was also picked up in another echo of this, is picked up by Sigmund Freud when he realized that there was this tendency within, tribal people, within the consciousness of human beings, to sort of overcome the father. His very famous book, Totem and Taboo, which was about, how the sons conspire against overthrowing the father. He had noticed this particular complex in all human beings. For all we know, this may also have dated from the time when there was this enormous rebellion, one of the first big rebellions on this planet, from sons basically to the fathers.
So are we Homo sapiens or Homo Atlanteans?
Or both. Depends on, again, it's all a play on words, and it's just from whatever school you're coming from. Homo sapien is Homo Atlantis. I know, I'm absolutely convinced that we're going to find this out soon. I mean, this month, top scientists have already shown that a great deal of the DNA of the human being is, in fact, alien. It doesn't exist in this world at all. I have the latest facts on that. There's been Canadian scientists who've come out to show this, and I have the link on my blog. So if people go to the blog and they go to the Atlantis section of my blog, they'll be able to see this incredible revelation that's just hot off the press. I mean, this is literally very, very recent. And if they can get to the blog by going to my website, michaeltsarion.com, and they'll see a link to the blog there. And then when you're on the blog, go to Atlantis section, and you'll see that there's this incredible revelation. So I believe, you see, we're coming to the time where we're going to have these facts that show exactly how old our history is, and that even before this visitation, the human being lived in a completely different way on this planet. This is one of the things I'm mostly interested in also, is what were we doing on this planet? What kind of consciousness did we have before all of this visitation? Because the visitation, the War of the Gods, the destruction of the planet Tiamat, the deluge, the flood, the subsequent upheavals on Earth, the cataclysms, all of this taken together constituted an enormous trauma visited upon the human consciousness.
This is where the evil came into the world?
Yes, this is where the evil came into the world, because I came into this subject from that school, from the philosophical question of why is man so cruel and inhuman and unjust? I'm not a person from the UFO movement. I'm not a person from the paranormal movement at all. I got into those things. I got into the questions of Atlantis because my own researches into the origins of evil took me there. Because I had some questions that were not being answered by, biblicists, by historians, by scholars, by scientists who just, weren't giving anything close to accurate answers. And it was only when I started reading the individuals who were talking about visitation to this planet, Eric von Däniken jumps to mind, you see, Brinsley, Laporte, Trench, and some other authors, that then, just like my book has been doing for so many people in the world, I got put onto this same subject from reading, authors that were speculating in this way. And my difference is that a lot of the authors who were speculating in this way, they tend to favor the Nephilim. They think that the Nephilim are the great brothers of mankind, that they did a really good thing by upgrading all of us. And of course, this is what this latest article, even from the science world on the DNA, they also take that line. Well, see, I've never taken that line. Even from the 70s when I first started getting into this, I did not believe, like Eric von Däniken and Zachariah Sitchin, you see, and a lot of these other writers, all believed that this was just so wonderful. This, a bone-chucking cave dweller on Earth, suddenly got a spiritual upgrade because of the visitation of alien brothers, and I've never bought into that, Star Trek palaver. I don't believe in that at all. I think it was the worst thing that ever happened, and it interfered with our natural destiny. And I do not believe that, prior to 50,000 years ago, we were the primitive, bone chuckers that everybody in the science community believes that we were. I do not believe that for 1 minute.
Just discovering fire.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Shivering in the dark and, scared of every noise in the sky. I believe that was our pathetic condition after the trauma. Yeah. After our DNA had been spliced, after transgenic experimentations had been done on us, after our Earth had been wrecked by the most ferocious storms that wiped out most of the fauna and flora on the planet, after whole, planets were known to have gone missing in our solar system, etc., etc., etc. After the rising of tyrannous empire states of the throughout Mesopotamia, and wars of bloodshed, and I can tell you where the trauma comes from. It's not from anything prior to visitation; it's post-visitation. And one of the most interesting aspects which I deal with in my work is that, again, it's more of a philosophical, psychological component, which very few people within the paranormal movement have ever dealt with, is that the birth of the ego, what we have today is our waking ego consciousness, that thing you wake up every day with and think with, is also a result of the trauma. And that is why it operates in such horrendously, infantile, limbic ways. Biologists, brain surgeons, have already discovered that we have the R complex, the limbic realm. But what they don't tell you is where the limbic realm came from. They're convinced it's, again, a legacy of millions of years. No, it's not. The limbic drives of instinct and warlikeness and flight and fight and survivalism and just this primitive instinctual nature is not millions of years old. That's another lie. It is definitely in our being to be like that, but that is the result of this trauma that I'm talking about. But infinitely more interesting than that is that the ego itself, the thing that we refer to as the ego, which unfortunately most people haven't ever thought about what the ego is or what mind is. I try to talk to audiences about this subject only to find out that most people have never even thought about thinking. They're not even aware of, wait a minute, what is the Jungian fourfold aspect of the psyche, or what is the Freudian tripartite system of consciousness. I mean, most people have grown up and they don't even know that. They're not even thinking about what is the mind, what is this thing I use every day, what is this thing that has me constantly troubleshooting my life and keeps me in so much angst, and there's this thing that have this constant inner dialogue going on, this thing that I have in an interior life as opposed to the exterior life of nature and the world out there. But here I am walking around in division with my little own personal voice, my little narcissistic drives and needs inside, and then there's this whole other spectacular thing going on outside in the world, and people take this all as normal. They're in a totally pathological situation, and have completely accustomed themselves to it.
It wasn't Eve that caused the fall of man.
Oh, well, this is what the Bible wants you to believe. This is what the Christians want you to believe, because they'll do anything. They'll concoct any story to, number one, work on your lower drives, but primarily to keep you as far away as possible from really asking serious questions about consciousness and about that story and about, is man really superior? Is he? What do you mean when he's made in the image of God? Who is this serpent that's meant to be so powerful that God, sort of lets him talk to these innocents, and then he blames the innocents? I have a whole chapter on this paradox in the Bible about why, in my book, why would God even allow this evil serpent anywhere near his new creations, and then allow them to be tempted and all of these kinds of things? The church has never answered these questions sufficiently.
Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, it doesn't, but it makes sense when you discover what the tree and the serpent really refers to.
That's what I was actually just going to get to. Where does the tree of life fit into all this?
Well, the tree of life is an old euphemism, going back to the earliest dynasties of Ireland and Egypt, back into India. Do you know that in some of these early carvings that you can find in southern India, it was a Colonel Dow of the British Army, who's an anthropologist, actually discovered carvings in India of a woman sitting near the tree with a serpent, Garden of Eden scenes. But in the Indian versions, George, the serpent was a benign influence, an enlightener, a bringer of wisdom to the parents, the primal parents. And that mythology is corroborated in all the other mythologies of the world, that the serpent is actually nothing more than a symbol of occult or secret or hidden knowledge, and that its coming to the primal parents was a benevolent thing to rise them out of stupidity and rise them out of ignorance, specifically the female.
Well, we can't have that.
Right. So what happened was this ancient Babylonian, Sumerian, Indian, Druidic myth, it was known through all over the world, was used and then again twisted, because evil cannot create anything. Evil can only twist that which has been created by great minds. So all these mythologies were assembled and they were twisted to tell another tale, a propaganda story. And it's very, very important for people to have a very false consciousness, because again, if you're divided in your gender? That's another division. That's another healthy division for the people of the world, the controllers, to use on you.
Yeah, divide and conquer.
Yeah. Now your sexuality is even divided. Now you're going to project all your blame onto women of the world, you see, and vice versa. Then women who've been recipient of that kind of intense open physical violence, the removal from positions of power, the prevention of them holding spiritual office like they used to do in Egypt. In Egypt, women had absolutely equal power. They were paid the same amount of wage for any jobs that they did. They had all sorts of spiritual and religious and social office. There's no such thing as prejudice over there. You can't have that. But if women then have to subsequently suffer, you see, being held, their instinctual energies, their libido, is perpetually trained and conditioned and told that they're inferior and told that they're wicked, eventually women start acting exactly like that, either consciously or unconsciously, because they need, you can't bottle up somebody's energy permanently. So then women's psyche becomes this miasma of conflict. And women start using a form of psychic and emotional violence of their own, because they've had to withstand enormous tyranny, you see, and the canalization of their natural energies. So the fate of women is also very much tied up into this, and the loss of the destiny for women, to forget that they are actually custodians of the knowledge, that they're meant to be highly involved in mystical tradition, because they once were the keepers of it, you see, and they're not just meant to be serving the beast out there, pushing the wheel.
And that's why the women in indigenous races have been suppressed and slaughtered through the ages.
Right. In all the religions, it's the same story.
Yeah.
But, you can't expect the men to then wake up and change. Let the women understand what is going on and change themselves. Let them find out, that this doesn't need to continue, that you don't need to buy into all of this, these stupid customs and traditions and religions that suppress your energy. What are they doing? Waiting for man to suddenly wake up, just like, with the problem with the Negroes and the blacks? They're going to wait for white men to emancipate them. They don't want to do it themselves. Is women going to wait till men become, aware that this is the wrong situation? What kind of a ludicrous situation would that be? Why can't they do it themselves? How come it has to be D.H. Lawrence writing about female emancipation and the awakening of the female spirit? How come it has to be a man doing it? Because again, you're dealing with people who wake up to this only on a very limited level. The feminists who understand that there's been great, what you would call injustice done to them, only are moving from a tunnel vision of now we need to do the same.
Right.
Now we need to wake up and, now we need to sort of become tyrants in our own stead.
Yeah, now it's our turn.
Now it's our turn. Wait a minute, that's all? That's what your degree has got you? That to understand that, get out of tyranny and become the next generation of tyrants? No. To truly be psychologically and attitudinally free requires more than just to, free yourself from a form of slavery. It means to completely develop and mature to the state that you were in before you were enslaved. But I don't see any of that. They're just exchanging chains of iron for chains of gold. Where have you ever seen? Have you ever seen a women's group recently that has stood up against the massacres that are happening to women and children in Iraq?
I can't say that I have.
No. When's the last time you saw them petitioning the White House or taking a 1 million woman march down there to do that? They'll do it for some meaningless, tawdry, domestic, social reason. Gays can come out in millions to march over some nonsense, because they can't marry their own kind or some other nonsense. But men, women, and children are being slaughtered, right, in a massive genocide. Where do you see the women of the world getting together in any kind of organization to go and do anything about it and say, we rally with the women of Iraq or we rally with the women of the world, we're going to put a stop to this? You know something? It would happen, by the way. If women really did this, it would happen. But it doesn't happen because I'm trying to explain to you that men and women are intensely violent creatures, one to the other. And most people think that freedom is when you can do more violence to your enemy than they can do to you. It's like that old Leonard Cohen song, all I learned about love is that, you can outdraw the other person. We have a long, long way to go before we can really chant, about freedom and emancipation and all of these kinds of nonsensical things.
So why is it that it makes it so easier to believe a lie than it is the obvious?
It goes to the heart of what the great American philosopher said, Vernon Howard. He said, why healing fails to occur is because it is much easier to hurt another than heal oneself. It all has to do with the massive meta-conditioning. We've been talking a little bit about gender conditioning. There's a greater form of conditioning over that. Trauma brought the ego into birth. And the ego has basically been troubleshooting its relationships with the outer world. But there's an inner world. As even Bruce Lipton and the scientists have now proven, 99.9% of your consciousness is unconsciousness. The psyche is made up of vast amounts of unconscious content, and the so-called ego waking consciousness is pathetically minute. Jung, Freud, they all talked about the pre-conscious, the unconscious, you see. The religious people have talked about the realm of the soul. Another way, existentially, you can put it that there's mind think and there's brain think. But for some unknown reason, and it's probably because the shamans of the world, those teachers who used to introduce you to your inner thinking, to the individual, are all gone. They're all dead. So we live in a world now which is highly extrovert in nature, in which we're always outer directed, and we're waiting for the stimulus of the world to turn us on. But that is a paltry kind of existence. The real existence is to work with uniqueness, to find out that you are a self, that you are unique under the stars, there's only one of you, and that you must become fully conscious of the miracle of your own selfhood, right from the sensual level all the way up to the causal level and into the spiritual level. To become fully aware of that. Now, that doesn't mean fully aware of your ego's brilliance, which is, what most people are doing. That's a form of narcissism, where you're so enraptured by your own so-called ego, ability. It's like a child is fixated with one toy. Well, what you see with all of this physical culture and this aggrandizement cosmetically and the cult of appearance and, the exercise fanaticism and just the me, myself, and I, that's not true selfhood at all. That's infatuation with the ego and its world and what it can give you, and then the accessories and the decoration of the ego. Mm-hmm. But the mystical tradition, the psychological tradition, is about a full, comprehensive understanding of the miracle of your own uniqueness. But that is the very thing that is erased and prevented from the moment that we enter into this world. And the parents are responsible, even if they're not aware of it, and the teachers certainly are, so we have a culture in which you're not able to investigate your selfhood. You're not able to find out how absolutely unique you are. In fact, your uniqueness is something that is, ironed out.
Yeah.
And we have people now living on the periphery of being. They're not even close to their own authentic inner voice.
God, no.
And this is a critical problem for our age.
2007 is really the beginning to get to 2012, really.
Yeah, it's a countdown. It's been a countdown that's been going on since 1999 if you go by the Maya calendar. Yeah. But even if the Mayan calendar's on or it's off a little bit, it really doesn't matter, because this is all to do with the end of the age of Pisces. We're in the final degrees of the age of Pisces according to the Western astrological system. Yeah. And that's just sort of an equivalent to what the Maya were saying, that around about 2012, and they're talking about a major countdown where their age ends. And I believe it's the age of the human being that ends. I don't believe that most people on this planet are human. They don't operate in a human way. To operate in a human way is easy to understand. Aristotle, the Greeks, have written volumes on it, and it simply means to be a virtuous person, a moral person. Morality, virtue is not just quite morality. There's a bit of an understanding here. Virtue, morality, is not just a person doing good deeds, because even a criminal can do that. Even a serial killer can operate, in his daily life doing good, like when he's at his job, you see. So everybody can do this performance, which we call, being non-criminal or being,
being a good citizen.
Yeah, good citizen, whatever. That's not morality. That is not what the Greeks were talking about with virtue. Virtue is a condition, an inherent condition of the soul that I believe is very much connected with a person's experience, a person's own depth. It's like we were saying, we're dragged from that place. We're not even able to get in touch with this inner place. Virtue is not just the performance of, good deeds in order to get some ego-gratifying return. It is an absolute embodied condition of the self. And this is what distinguishes human beings from one to the other.
Yeah.
And we're living in a world now that is, so removed from that, where almost unvirtue, immorality, and amorality is openly promoted and openly rewarded.
The exact opposite of what should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe that the human race is on its way out. If you define human, you may be still walking around on the streets of the world after 2012, but that's meaningless. If you don't have a conscience inside, if you're walking dead. And I got to tell you that when I walk around in the world right now, I think I'm amongst the walking dead. As
Ditto.
horrible as it is to say.
Yeah, ditto.
We're not in the Victorian age when there was an immense sense of virtue and morality in people. Not cultivated. Of course, you always have the people who cultivated it. But it was in people. That's what produced those wonderful Pre-Raphaelite paintings. That's what produced the incredible poetry, you see, from Shelley and Byron and Hardy and Tennyson and all of this. There was an enormous sense still within people, even just 100 years ago.
I hear this question all the time. Why don't we have any more Mozarts or Shakespeare's or?
Yeah, well, you can't have those people because their creativity is an epiphenomena, a symptom of a deep and abiding selfhood, a very deep interior life, a sense of introversion, a connection to the true voice, and it's also an extension of these people's morality and true humanity, not as a political concept, not as some cozy campus, jive that you've learned, parroted, like good for all and humanity for all. Instantly in the 60s, they were all running around screaming about injustice for, Vietnam, and then it cools down, and there's people go right back to the beast.
Yeah,
Isn't there enough injustice in America, long before the time of the Vietnam War, that people should have been going absolutely berserk about? I'm not complaining that they stood up, but that was an important idiom, important moment in history, sure. But you're going to tell me what about the Native American Indians? Wasn't that another Holocaust in America, that the people should have been standing up every campus?
You bet.
There's just yawn about that, or the dumping of nuclear waste on the back door of reservations. Come on, you tell me that they can't find a reason? There's even ordinary people in America starving all over the major cities. Incredible injustices is being done on a corporate level, and nobody even doing barely anything about that.
Yeah.
This is the kind of hypocrisy. It's okay when it's a foreign nemesis, when it's something far away, when it's removed from your own shore. It seems that people will jump for all of those things, because again, that's training. You take a fantastic stallion and you train it every hour on the hour with a whip, from morning till night. It is going to do the most dumbest tricks for you.
Yeah.
It's like the elephant,